Late September, Yellowstone witnessed something strange. The park entrances were blocked, not by snow, landslides, or migrating bison herds, but by bobcats. Not just one or two, which would have been rare enough, but thousands. The forest's most solitary creatures had appeared all at once, forming an unmoving wall of living fur. It all began in an uncanny silence. Birds vanished, squirrels froze in place. At first, tourists thought it was just another traffic jam, until they saw the spotted barrier ahead. Scientists rushed in with their most advanced equipment. Yet sensors, meters, and data all stayed mute, showing nothing out of the ordinary. Some believed the bobcats were simply expanding their territory, a protest against deforestation. But others feared. They were sensing something beyond human understanding, a warning sign that deep within Yellowstone, a disaster was quietly brewing. And that chilling question hung in the still air. What do these wild predators know that we don't? Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our unexpected stories. The first sign that the world had slipped off its course wasn't an explosion, but a deep, uncanny silence. Jonathan Miller felt it in his very bones, a hush so absolute it seemed to swallow even the familiar rumble of his old Ford Bronco. He glanced at his wife, Karen, whose knitting needles now lay motionless in her lap. Her brow was furrowed, her eyes fixed on the winding asphalt road cutting through the Montana forest. "Something's not right," she whispered, her voice so faint it nearly dissolved into the cold wind outside. In the back seat, 14-year-old Ethan remained oblivious, lost in the blue glow of his phone. His messy brown hair hung down, veiling his face, while unfamiliar bass beats pulsed faintly through his headphones. "Ethan, put that away," Jonathan said, his voice gravelly yet warm. "Look around you. This is God's country. What you see out here, you'll never find on that screen." Ethan let out a grunt, the classic sound of 14-year-old defiance, but eventually shoved the phone into his pocket. "It's just trees, Grandpa, and a bunch of mountains. 5 hours, and it all looks the same." "Not true, son," Jonathan replied firmly, his calloused hand pointing toward the towering Absaroka Range, its cliffs ablaze in late September reds and golds. "This is Yellowstone. It doesn't just stand here. It breathes." But today, that breath seemed to have stopped. The familiar chatter of sparrows and warblers had vanished. No squirrels darted across the pine branches. The air, usually tinged with pine resin and wild sage, had turned heavy, stagnant, as if nature itself were holding its breath, waiting. The old Ford Bronco rounded a sharp bend, leading toward the park's north entrance near Gardner, Montana. The engine gave one last growl, then sputtered down to silence. Up ahead, a line of cars stretched out of sight over the rise. Probably just tourists again, Jonathan sighed to himself. Maybe a bison herd decided to take a nap in the middle of the road. "Looks like we'll be waiting a while," he said aloud. But this wasn't the usual wildlife jam. People were climbing out of their cars, faces a mixture of confusion and shock. The sound of doors opening and slamming mixed with a spreading murmur that replaced the silence from moments before. Jonathan squinted, trying to see past the glare bouncing off the windshield ahead. Whatever blocked the road wasn't dark and shaggy like a bison. It was mottled tawny gold streaked with darker spots. And it was moving a rolling sea of fur, flowing like a current. Dear God, what the hell is that? Jonathan unbuckled his seatbelt and shoved open the heavy door of the old Bronco. A rush of air hit him, thick with a wild, musky scent he couldn't place. He stepped forward slowly. Karen and Ethan, curiosity now pulling them in, followed close behind. The sight before him nearly took Jonathan's breath away. Bobcats, not one or two a rarity in itself, not even dozens a miracle. But hundreds. No, thousands. They filled the road, from the cracked edges of asphalt to the faded yellow center line, spilling into the sagebrush and wild grass on both sides. A living wall, a silent, spotted army. Some crouched low, ear tufts twitching. Others lay stretched in the autumn sun, broad paws tucked neatly beneath their bodies. Many simply stood motionless, their stubby tails rigid, golden eyes rimmed in black locked forward with an unnerving stillness. They didn't snarl. They didn't call to one another. They simply existed as one, an indivisible force beyond explanation. "Grandpa, are they real?" Ethan's voice was barely a breath, his phone long forgotten. For the first time on the entire trip, his eyes were wide, not from the glow of a screen, but from pure astonishment. "They're real, son," Jonathan answered, his voice heavy, trembling under the weight of his own fear. "I've lived 65 years, spent nearly half that time climbing and fishing in these mountains. In all my life, I've only seen a bobcat 3 times. Always just a flash of fur, gone before it became anything more than a memory. But this, never anything like this." A park ranger moved along the line of cars, his weathered face a map, etched by years of sun and wind. He stopped, his eyes sweeping across the crowd, half curious, half terrified. The faded nameplate on his chest read, "Ranger Collins." "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your vehicles, or at least don't wander far from them," he called out. His voice carried the weight of decades in the wild, firm, gravelly, commanding. Yet when his gaze drifted over the unmoving sea of bobcats, a flicker in his eyes betrayed the truth that even he, a man who had seen everything nature could offer, had never witnessed anything remotely like this. "We don't know exactly what's happening," Ranger Collins said, his tone low and steady but resolute. "The only thing we can do right now is stay calm and wait." "Wait?" a man shouted from the SUV behind the miller's Bronco, his voice cracking with panic. The loud Hawaiian shirt he wore only made his rage seem more out of place. "There's a goddamn plague of bobcats blocking the road. Can't you drive them off?" Collins spun around, his pale gray eyes so cold they looked sharp enough to wear down granite. "Sir, that's thousands of wild predators. Each one weighs close to 30 pounds with teeth and claws strong enough to tear flesh apart. We will not drive them off. And for your own safety, I strongly suggest you step back." With that, he resumed his slow, deliberate patrol along the line of cars, every step measured yet commanding. His gaze lingered on the spotted river of bobcats, unmoving as though the entire world itself were holding its breath. He remembered he'd started his career as a seasonal ranger back in 1983. He had seen wildfires turn the sky into a sheet of orange for months, winters that buried lookout towers clear to the roof, and the triumphant return of wolves after decades of absence. But never once had he faced anything like this. He had felt the ground tremble under minor quakes, watched Old Faithful erupt, and then choke mid-spout. But this was different. This was a rupture in the laws of nature. Bobcats, often called the phantoms of the deep woods, were solitary hunters, fiercely jealous guardians of their territory. Catching sight of 2 together was considered a rare stroke of luck. But the sight before Collins, a sea of bobcats packed shoulder to shoulder, turning the impossible into reality, made the hair on his arms stand on end. The radio clipped to his shoulder crackled, breaking through the heavy silence. Fragmented voices came in from Yellowstone's 4 other gates, and every report told the same story. The park had been sealed off, not by fences of steel or a massive landslide, but by a silent, watchful army of the wilderness's most elusive predators. By midday, the phenomenon had seized the world's attention. News helicopters buzzed overhead like steel dragonflies, keeping their distance but missing not a single frame. And then, the cavalry arrived not with rifles, but with PhDs. A sleek black U.S. Geological Survey helicopter touched down in a clearing about a quarter mile from the Bobcat blockade. The rotors slashed the air, whipping dust and dry leaves into a blinding storm. Stepping out was Dr. Olivia Grant, a woman radiating an edge sharpened by discipline and a current of restless energy barely held in check. Her reddish-brown hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, framing eyes of sharp aquamarine green. She was a seismologist, a creature of data, charts, and pure science. She trusted sensors, not stories. As she moved onto the scene, two technicians followed close behind, lugging silver cases of instruments. In Olivia's mind, a list of plausible scenarios ran like a string of equations. Some kind of neurological parasite, contaminated water triggering mass behavioral disruption, perhaps even a rare fungus hidden in Yellowstone's ecosystem. There had to be an explanation, something that fit neatly within the parameters science already knew. Olivia found Ranger Collins leaning against the hood of a Ranger pickup, his eyes fixed on the sea of bobcats, as if trying to decipher a language humanity had long forgotten. Ranger Collins. I'm Dr. Olivia Grant, U.S. Geological Survey. Her handshake was firm, her gaze carrying the cool resolve of a scientist who had always regarded men like him as relics of another age. What's the official report so far? Collins gave a slight nod toward the Wildcats. They're waiting. Olivia frowned. Waiting for what? Supply trucks? Ranger? I need data-specific behaviors. The time this began. Anything that can be quantified. They started showing up right after sunrise, Collins replied, his voice steady, unshaken by the condescension in her eyes. At first, just one or two, then dozens, then hundreds. Behavior-wise, they only stand there silent, watchful, but the moose, the elk, all gone. The entire Lamar Valley emptied overnight, like it was swept clean by some invisible terror. Same with the birds. I even saw a flock of sandhill cranes leave 3 weeks early. He looked upward, though his gaze never left the frozen river of bobcats. The ground is silent, but the sky is screaming. Olivia pressed her lips together. To her, this was nothing more than anecdote. She needed data, not metaphors laced with superstition. We'll deploy broadband seismometers and gas spectrometers immediately, she said firmly. If there are any signs of geothermal activity or unusual seismic patterns, we'll find them. For the next 2 hours, Olivia and her team worked with urgent precision. Sensor stakes were driven deep into the soil. A drone equipped with infrared cameras lifted off, sweeping the length of the valley. Air sampling tubes were sealed and fed straight into portable analyzers. But as the results scrolled across the laptop screen, Olivia felt the heat rush to her face. Everything was infuriatingly normal. The ground beneath them was as stable as solid granite. Sulfur emissions from the caldera sat well within safe limits. No tremors, no harmonic oscillations, no ground deformation. Nothing. The data, cold and precise, declared it was just another ordinary Tuesday in Yellowstone. And yet outside, thousands of bobcats stood frozen like statues, a phenomenon defying a century of behavioral science that had always insisted otherwise. A chill crept over Olivia, an uninvited doubt, breaking through the fortress of logic she had built around herself. She realized she was staring at the bobcats, straining to press them into columns of data, into lifeless graphs. But they weren't numbers. They were living beings acting with the unity of a collective mind, in defiance of every textbook she had ever taught or studied. At the roadblock, the mood had shifted, from early curiosity to a quiet, creeping fear. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in burning orange and deep violet. Park staff moved along the line of cars, handing out water bottles and granola bars to those trapped in the standstill. Ethan Miller sat on the hood of the old Ford Bronco, his phone now buried useless in his pocket, forgotten for hours. Instead, his eyes fixed on a large male bobcat with wheat-colored fur, sitting less than 30 feet away. Its golden eyes weren't on the people, But locked on the distant peaks, shoulders relaxed yet radiating a poised stillness like a warrior waiting for a signal. Jonathan settled down beside him. The old legends say, when the animals move as one, it means the mountain is about to speak. What do you mean, Grandpa? Ethan asked, his voice low, as if afraid to shatter the silence around them. It means the earth has a voice too, Jonathan answered slowly. We've forgotten how to listen to it. We have machines, satellites, computers, we think we know it all. But animals, they sense the world in ways we can't. They feel shifts in air pressure, hear tiny vibrations deep in the ground, pick up frequencies humans will never hear. Maybe, just maybe, they're hearing something we can't. Ethan thought about this, his eyes never leaving the bobcat. For a moment, the animal turned its head. Its golden eyes met his not with malice, not with threat. Only a silence that was ancient, solemn, profound. It felt like a warning, sorrowful, yet dignified. And suddenly, Ethan felt an inexplicable urge rising in his chest, to warn the bobcat back, to tell it he understood. Slowly, he lifted his hand not to wave, but as a gesture of acknowledgement for the fragile bond that had just formed. The bobcat held his gaze for a long moment, then turned back toward the mountains. The thread of connection was cut, but its echo lingered inside him. Ethan was no longer just a spectator. He felt as though he had become part of the vast mystery unfolding before them. As night fell, cold air spilled down from the mountains into the valley. Park staff set up portable light towers, their harsh white beams flooding the surreal scene. The bobcats remained motionless. Their golden eyes caught the artificial light, turning the roadway into a field of eerie, suspended embers like fallen stars scattered across the earth. Every attempt to force them back had failed miserably. One ranger had risked driving a heavy truck slowly toward the massive cats, its horn blaring. But the bobcats didn't budge. They only stared at the approaching vehicle with a collective indifference, until the driver's nerve broke and he was forced to back away. Even the use of high-frequency sonic emitters, normally enough to scatter wildlife, proved useless. The cats only flicked their tufted ears, annoyed as if by the buzz of a fly, before sinking back into stillness. Their ranks held firm, like a wall of stone. Inside the mobile command center, Dr. Olivia Grant pulled her jacket tighter around her. Her eyes stayed locked on the wall of glowing monitors, stubborn green graphs still flatlined at normal. A cursed normalcy while outside. All of nature was defying every rule she had ever trusted. Olivia was on a conference call with a panel of experts in Washington, D.C., their frustration crackling through the small speaker in the command trailer. Dr. Grant, the president's office is requesting an immediate update. A stern male voice came through, breaking with static. The media is running wild with this, calling it the Bobcat Apocalypse, framing it as nature's revolt. We need an explanation. I don't have one, Olivia snapped, her scientific composure beginning to crack. All the data I have shows nothing unusual. The ground is stable. The caldera is breathing normally. By every metric, this is not a geological or seismic event. Then what is it? Olivia looked up, her gaze drawn to the glass window where thousands of golden bobcat eyes glinted in the glare of the floodlights. She swallowed hard. It's a biological event, she said. But even as the words left her lips, she felt how hollow, how meaningless they sounded. A biological event that's unprecedented and unexplainable. She ended the call, rubbing her temples as a sharp ache pressed deep behind her eyes. Stepping out of the command trailer, she drew in the knife-cold air of night. Ranger Collins was already there, a battered silver thermos in hand. He held it out to her. Coffee, black, strong. Olivia accepted it, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes as the heat seeped into her numb fingers. They still haven't moved. No, Collins replied, his voice low and gravelly. But he wasn't looking at the cats, he was staring up at the sky. The sky's gone quiet too. No bats, no owls. Everything's either hiding or gone. He took a sip from his cup, then gave a slow shake of his head. My first teacher out here was a Shoshone man named Ben. He used to say this place can't be measured by machines. You measure it with instinct. And right now, Collins paused, his eyes still fixed on the black void above. My gut's in a knot. Olivia wanted to dismiss it as nothing more than folk wisdom, but she couldn't. Her own instincts were whispering the same thing. Her instruments were blind to the truth. They were measuring the wrong things. What do you think it is, Collins? She asked. To tell you the truth. Ranger Collins fell silent, his gaze following the constellations glittering in the clear, icy sky. I don't think they're trying to hold us back, he said at last, his voice low and steady. I think they're trying to keep us from stepping into something terrible. I think they're protecting us. By the rules of science, the idea was flimsy, emotional, something Olivia should have scoffed at. But she didn't. She looked out at the thousands of silent sentinels beneath the cold starlit sky. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of what Collins had spoken of. Not fear of the unknown, but a deep, primal reverence. The event began just before 3 a.m. It didn't start with a tremor, but with a sensation, a resonant hum that spread upward from the soles of their feet into the marrow of their bones. It was a sound so deep it nearly slipped beneath human hearing, a pressure wave that thickened the very air, heavy and oppressive. Inside the USGS command trailer, every one of Dr. Olivia Grant's sensors screamed into the red. Alarms shrieked in her ears. Graphs spiked into jagged peaks that defied explanation. Yet the strangest part, the data carried none of the signatures of a classic earthquake. No P waves, no S waves following behind. Olivia pictured the hot springs, the fragile crust of sinter above, superheated water, churning violently below. If hundreds of tourists had been standing on that ground, it could have collapsed in an instant. And it would have been a massacre. The resonance grew stronger, vibrations climbing to a punishing peak that made teeth ache as though they might shatter. People collapsed to the ground all around, clinging to whatever felt solid enough to hold. The Miller family huddled beside the old Ford Bronco, Karen throwing her body over Ethan to shield him. And in the chaos, the Bobcats became the still eye of the storm. They all rose at once, as though one single body. Hundreds, thousands of muscles tensed, tails dropped low, faces all turned toward the depths of the park. No cries, no panic, no sound at all. They simply stood, absorbing everything, taking in the tortured groan of the planet, as if they had been born for this very moment. They were anchors holding the line against a force no one could see. Their instincts hadn't merely drawn them to the thick asphalt laid down by humans. Something deeper had driven them to form a living barricade, a wall of flesh and bone standing between humanity and an invisible death trap. The rolling surge lasted nearly 3 minutes, an eternity measured in breathless upheaval. Then, as slowly as it had begun, it ebbed away. The deep hum faded, the ground stilled, and the crushing weight in the air dissolved, replaced once more by the clean, familiar scent of pine. A stunned silence blanketed the road. People staggered to their feet, dazed, as though waking from a collective nightmare. And then, every eye turned to the Bobcats. A ripple passed through the spotted army. One of the females at the front gave a faint shake of her head, as if waking from a trance. She turned back, cast one final glance across the line of cars, then slipped quietly off the pavement, dissolving into the dense night of the forest. Another followed, then another. Within minutes, the tide of Bobcats melted steadily back into the wilderness from which they had come. It wasn't a panicked retreat, but a deliberate, orderly withdrawal. Their mission was complete. The blockade was over. By sunrise, they were gone. The only evidence left behind was the scatter of thousands of paw prints pressed deep into the dust along the roadside. Afterward, The official story was labeled a near disaster. Dr. Olivia Grant became an unwilling figure in the media spotlight, offering calm, scientific explanations about the nature of prolonged seismic resonance and an unprecedented wildlife migration coincidences, she insisted, that just happened to avert a tragedy. She never spoke of Ranger Collins's intuition, nor did she admit to her own unscientific moment of awe. But her later reports were different, infused with a newfound humility and carrying a strong call for research into bioacoustics and the mysterious sensory abilities of animals. Olivia knew this much. The machines had failed, and the wild had prevailed. That year, the Miller family never entered Yellowstone. They turned the old Ford Bronco around and drove home in heavy, contemplative silence. The trip had changed them. In the back seat, Ethan no longer looked at his screen. His eyes were on the passing landscape outside the window. For the first time, he didn't see just a collection of trees and rock, but a single living being, breathing in unison. Now, he and Jonathan shared a secret, a memory of golden eyes and a silent warning, a bond stronger than any forced family vacation could ever create. At the North Gate, Ranger Collins stood quietly as the first cars inched their way back into the park. The air was clear again, birdsong rose into the sky, and the world seemed at peace once more. The media would call it an anomaly. The scientific community would publish their studies, but Collins knew the truth in his very bones. He had witnessed a miraculous act of interspecies grace. The wild had not risen in anger, nor in revolt. It had risen as a guardian protecting the very species that so often posed the greatest threat to it. He lifted his gaze toward the wilderness, breathing in the slow, steady rhythm of Yellowstone land, steeped in mystery and power, and felt a humble gratitude well up from the depths of his being. Humanity was not the keeper of this world, merely a guest. And that night, the guest had been spared by the unfathomable, wordless wisdom of the true host.